During the early years of the Galactic Civil War, the Rebel Alliance engaged in asymmetric warfare against the Galactic Empire, generally avoiding large, direct battles in favor of guerrilla campaigns, covert missions, and quick surgical strikes. Most Rebel cells were small and, relative to the Imperial military, lightly equipped, and Rebel strike fleets were regularly dwarfed by Imperial Navy task forces. But the Alliance did still have some conventional forces, most notably including the famed Rebel fleet, a small navy that could engage the full force of the Imperial Navy directly. The Rebel fleet was a highly diverse task force with its ships drawn from a wide variety of sources, and this diversity was one of the fleet's biggest strengths, allowing the Alliance to mix and match ships to best fit various situations. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the unsung heroes of the Rebel fleet, the smaller Corvettes and Frigates that made up the bulk of the Rebellion space forces, from the well-known Corellian Corvettes and Nebulon-Bs to more obscure vessels.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
During the early Galactic Civil War, the prospect of a unified Alliance fleet seemed like a pipe dream to Rebel leadership. All the Alliance had at the time was a collection of small, largely outdated capital ships and converted civilian freighters, with their largest vessels being a handful of old Separatist warships, none of which lasted more than a year after the Battle of Yavin. But as the Alliance grew and started winning victories, new Rebel cells brought more and more ships into the fleet, and a proper navy began to form. After the Mon Calamari threw off the Empire and began contributing their cruisers and best officers to the Alliance, Chief of State Mon Mothma was able to formally organize the Alliance's space assets into the Rebel fleet, which was placed under the command of Admiral of the Fleet, Jial Akbar. Admiral Akbar attempted to reorganize the fleet into a more traditional fighting force, but despite this, the Rebel fleet was still not a conventional navy, and it was never meant to be. While it occasionally dispatched small battle groups to engage Imperial forces, the fleet itself only went into battle for major operations like the evacuation of Yavin and the Battle of Endor. Most of the time, the fleet kept to the fringes of space, far from the Rebellion's planetary bases, serving as a constantly mobile base and training ground for the Rebellion. As it did so, the fleet prepared for a full-scale confrontation with the Imperial Navy, but it held off on initiating one until the time was right. The Rebel fleet was most important, however, as a psychological weapon. Even if it was very rare for the Rebel fleet to actually make a move, the Imperials knew that it was always out there and it could potentially strike anywhere at any time. On top of that, the Rebel fleet undermined the Empire's grip on the galaxy simply by existing. The fact that the Imperial Navy couldn't find and destroy such a large military force was a clear sign of Imperial weakness. This threat unsettled the Empire's leaders to the point that they devoted a huge part of the Imperial Navy to hunting down the Rebel fleet, making the Empire vulnerable to smaller Rebel units on other fronts. Of course, though it avoided battle most of the time, the Rebel fleet was still made for combat, and Admiral Akbar organized it with a specific battle doctrine in mind. While the core of the fleet consisted of the Alliance's famed Mon Calamari cruisers, some of which were among the few ships built specifically for the Alliance, most of the fleet consisted of smaller vessels acquired secondhand. Some were former museum ships or retrofitted civilian vessels, while others had been stolen from the Imperial Navy or local fleets. They had a wide variety of different manufacturers and design features, and their widely varying strengths and weaknesses made them among the Rebel fleet's most important assets. When Rebel ships took to the battlefield, it was usually these smaller ones, occasionally accompanied by a cruiser or two. Those smaller ships are going to be the focus of this video. Specifically, we're going to be looking at Rebel ship classes that were considered Corvettes or Frigates under the Anaxis War College system. But before we do, a few quick clarifications. It's somewhat tricky to determine what actually counts as a Rebel capital ship class. Very few ships were actually built for the Rebellion after all, and in some cases, the Rebels had just one ship of a particular class, or temporarily had control of stolen Imperial vessels. For clarity's sake, we're only going to be discussing ship classes that were used pretty regularly by the Alliance, and we're going to be brief when discussing ships that were originally made for the Republic, CIS, or Empire, with one notable exception. Like with our other ship videos, we're also only going to be talking about combat-oriented capital ships today, so we'll be excluding most transports, freighters, and so on. However, due to the nature of the Rebel fleet, it can be difficult to draw dividing lines there too, and we've made an exception for one especially iconic transport class. But with that out of the way, let's begin. We're going to start with that one Rebel transport class, which occasionally functioned as a light corvette, the Gallifrey Yard's GR-75 medium transport, one of the most iconic Rebel starships. The Rebellion had hundreds of these cheap and ubiquitous starships, which they used for many different purposes. The GR-75 was primarily used by civilian shipping firms, although it could be used as a military supply ship as well. The Republic used some for this purpose during the Clone Wars. They were common enough that the Rebellion could make extensive use of them without attracting Imperial attention, making them arguably the most important part of Alliance supply chains. The GR-75 medium transport was basically just a hollow armored shell, vaguely clamshell shaped with a few protruding modules at the back, which could be packed full of modular cargo pods, which were exposed to space on the transport's underside. The ship was 90 meters long, bare bones, and highly efficient in design. Its few crewed decks, as well as its key systems, were all concentrated at the aft end of the ship. There, the transport's reactor partly protruded from the hull beneath an armored cowl, forming a dorsal ridge along the craft's spine, with the GR-75's engines clustered around it and the transport's fuel tanks running along the sides of the ship. The transport's 3 primary drive engines were located below the reactor on the underside of the ship, while 2 pairs of dual secondary drive engines protruded from the dorsal hull to either side of the reactor bulge. These engines gave the GR-75 a top atmospheric speed of 650 km per hour and a maximum acceleration of 900 Gs in open space, which was slow but not excruciatingly so. The transport's hyperdrive, a Class 4, was excruciatingly slow, however. The GR-75's armored shell was thick and fairly durable, and the transport boasted formidable shields as well, projected from a shield generator module that protruded from the top of the reactor bulge. This small module also contained the transport's bridge, from which the ship's crew of 6 manned the vessel. Ordinarily, the GR-75 was unarmed, but some Rebel transports were armed with a set of 4 fire-linked dual laser cannons, which were operated by a single gunner. The GR-75 wasn't meant to be a warship, however. It was meant to be a cargo hauler, and most of the vessel was given over to cargo storage space. Most of the GR-75 was completely hollow, consisting of just the hull, a few sensor and communications modules, and a grid of magnetic holding rails, which were exposed through gaps in the ship's hull. These rails were designed to hold modular cargo containers, which could be easily loaded and unloaded from the ship. This vast cargo space had room for up to 19,000 tons of cargo, plus 6 months of consumables. Some transports ditched some of this cargo space in favor of modular passenger holds, which could carry 40 to 90 passengers depending on configuration, while others exclusively hauled cargo. When a GR-75 was fully loaded, a magnetic shield would be activated to secure the pods in place. Generally, these transports were loaded and unloaded on planetary surfaces, and they were equipped with landing gear, boarding ramps, and a forward-mounted cargo crane to quickly and effectively move cargo pods from repulsor lift tugs onto the holding rails. The Alliance acquired its fleet of GR-75s for a bargain after the manufacturer, Gallifrey Yards, went bankrupt in 3 BBY, and though these ships were notorious for being high maintenance, the GR-75s served the Rebellion well. They were used to transport large numbers of personnel, from troops to VIPs and the wounded, as well as weapons, food, fuel, raw materials, spare parts, and other supplies. They were favoured by the Alliance due to how easy it was to load and unload on them, how easy it was to find spare parts, and the fact that they could land on planetary surfaces. The stock GR-75 had a hull that was impervious to sensors, and many Rebel transports were further equipped with sensor jammers, making it easy for Rebel supply runners to escape notice by Imperial forces. Unarmed GR-75 transports depended on the protection of the Rebel fleet or starfighter squadrons, especially during pitched battles, but many other Rebel transports were armed and able to defend themselves. Many Rebel GR-75s were detached from the Rebel fleet and grounded at the Alliance's bases for use as evacuation craft, with at least 2 stationed on Yavin 4 to evacuate Massassi Base, and 30 stationed on Hoth to evacuate Echo Base. During the Battle of Hoth, 17 of Echo Base's transports were destroyed by the Empire's Death Squadron, while the remaining 13 escaped. On top of their use as transports, cargo haulers, landing craft, hospital ships, and shuttles, Rebel GR-75s were used as high-capacity fuel haulers attached to starfighter squadrons for long-range missions, as salvage ships, and as light corvettes tasked with escorting larger capital ships. A few of the GR-75s in the Rebel fleet were even modified to serve as kamikaze ships. Their cargo carrying spaces were packed full of explosives, and they would be remotely rammed into Imperial Star Destroyers to great effect, as seen in the Battle of Endor and the Fondor Shipyard's assault. In all of these roles, the GR-75s served the Rebellion well, earning their place as one of the most distinctive Rebel ships. Now to move on to the Alliance's first real capital ship class, the Corvettes. Corvettes were the smallest class of capital ship, consisting of any vessel between 100 and 200 meters in length, and they were usually fast, maneuverable, and lightly armed. Corvettes were highly effective at dealing with fighters, freighters, and smaller ships, and though they could usually only provide light fire support against much larger vessels in a straight fight, they were often effective as blockade runners. In professional navies, corvettes often served as pickets, escorts, and system defense craft. In the Rebel fleet, they still saw use as escorts, but they were more commonly used as privateer ships and blockade runners. First up, we have the Brahatok-class gunship, also known as the Dornian gunship. This little ship, meant as an anti-starfighter picket, has a fascinating history. It was built by Dornian Brahaket Fleetworks conglomerate, the primary shipbuilder for the local Dornian navy, which used the ship to wage a private war against the Galactic Empire. Despite being dwarfed by the Imperial Navy, the Dornian Navy managed to fend off the Empire for years on their own, and these nimble corvettes were part of the reason why. Although the Dornians were independent from the Rebel Alliance, they contributed a few Brahatok-class gunships to the Rebel fleet in advance of the Battle of Endor. At 90 meters, the Brahatok was on the small side for a capital ship, even a corvette. It had a unique design, elongated and bulbous, with a crescent-shaped bow similar in aesthetic to Mon Calamari ships, but with many external systems, armor plates, and other features protruding from the main hull in blocky modules. While its cargo storage space was limited, the Brahatok could carry 8 months of consumables, and although its docking bays were cramped, it could carry at least 2 starfighters into battle. For a corvette, it was slow, its maneuverability was considered poor, and its hyperdrive was an outdated Class 3, but the Brahatok made up for this in other ways. The Brahatok was designed for a crew of 70 officers and enlisted personnel, the most important of which were stationed on the command decks at the ship's bow. The gunship had no room for embarked ground troops, and it could only carry 15 passengers. After all, it wasn't meant to be a troop carrier. The whole purpose of the Brahātok was as an anti-starfighter gunship, and it excelled in this role. It was well armored and well shielded, able to take far more punishment than its size suggested, and it was armed with 2 twin light turbo lasers, 1 per side, 8 quad laser cannons, 4 dorsal and 4 ventral, 2 forward mounted proton torpedo launchers, and 4 forward mounted concussion missile launchers. These allowed the Brahātok to punch well above its weight class, as well as to lay waste to squadrons of Imperial TIE fighters. The Brahātok was the terror of Imperial pilots assigned to the Dornian campaign, and during the Battle of Endor, 2 ships of the class, the Brahātok and the Tork-Tarak, were given to the Rebel fleet. These ships played a vital role in that climactic battle, though the Brahātok was severely damaged in the process. Next up, we have the Mansk-class escort frigate, a Tapani vessel designed and built by Talani shipyards. As the name suggests, this ship was a class of escort designed to protect larger vessels from attackers. The ship was 100 meters in length, on the smaller side for a Corvette, and it somewhat resembled the T-6 shuttle favored by the Jedi during the Clone Wars. Its powerful sublight engines made it fast and maneuverable with a maximum speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour in atmosphere, but it had a much slower Class 3 hyperdrive as it was only designed for use within the Tapani sector. The Mansk's shield and hull armor were tough and military grade, and was armed with 6 dual laser cannons and a single ion cannon. It was manned by a crew of 12, 5 crew and 7 gunners, and could carry 30 passengers and 8 tons of cargo, and it had space for a month's worth of consumables. The Mansk-class escort frigate was primarily used by the Tapani sector's noble houses, but a few found their way into the Rebel fleet. On the larger side of the Corvette scale, we have the Marauder-class assault corvette, a formidable fast attack ship meant for system patrol, law enforcement, fast attack duties, and/or anti-capital ship action, depending on the configuration. The Marauder was originally designed by CNR Technologies to serve as a patrol and escort ship for the Republic, but the Republic never purchased the line as a result of bureaucratic gridlock. CNR sold a few Marauder corvettes off to local forces, but it ended up just selling the design off wholesale, giving it to the corporate sector during the early Imperial period to be used as a picket, escort, and anti-pirate vessel in the corporate sector's private fleet. The corporate sector began manufacturing its own Marauder corvettes, several of which were stolen by rebels and became part of the rebel fleet. The Marauder-class assault corvette clocked in at 195 meters in length, and it was approximately 131 meters wide and 22 meters tall. It had a flat, shovel-headed forward section, a blocky, rectangular aft section with protruding fins, and 2 downswept wings tipped with large cannons. The corvette was easy to modify, with more powerful reactors and different weapons being common modifications, but even the stock Marauder was formidable. An array of ion engines propelled the corvette at atmospheric speeds of up to 850 kilometers per hour, and it boasted a Class 2 hyperdrive, which was faster than some of the other capital ships in the Rebel fleet. The Marauder was capable of atmospheric flight, as its design was aerodynamic and even featured airfoils and maneuvering flaps, and it could land on planetary surfaces to deploy embarked troops. It was designed for a crew of 177, 129 crew and 48 gunners, but it could operate on a minimum crew of just 52. On top of this crew, the Marauder could carry 80 embarked troops, 300 tons of cargo, and 3 months of consumables. The Marauder corvette was sometimes labeled a pocket cruiser, a ship that could do the job of a light cruiser despite being much smaller, and this was mostly due to its powerful weaponry and complement. On its underside, the Marauder featured a small hangar bay, which could carry up to 12 starfighters, 2 landing barges, and 4 shuttles. The corvette was well shielded and was also pretty heavily armed. It boasted 3 ultra-precise and surprisingly powerful tractor-beam projectors, 2 fore and 1 aft, as well as 8 dual turbo lasers, a heavy battery and a regular battery on each wing, 2 forward batteries and 2 aft batteries. The Marauder could also be modified to serve as a missile cruiser, replacing its turbo lasers with 4 Diamond Boron missile launchers. During the Galactic Civil War, the Marauder-class assault corvette was best known as a corporate sector ship, but they were popular with the Rebellion too, as rebel privateers regularly stole them in corporate sector raids. The Alliance modified most of its Marauder corvettes with missile launchers, using them as fast attack craft to be able to quickly cripple much larger vessels, but they also saw use as escorts or pickets. The Alliance made use of a handful of Old Republic Consular-class cruisers, which had been the Republic's most popular corvette class during the Clone Wars. A product of the Corellian Engineering Corporation, the Consular measured 115 meters in length with a compact but efficient design. It had a maximum atmospheric speed of 900 kilometers per hour and a maximum acceleration of 2,040 Gs in outer space, and it was also highly maneuverable. Depending on whether the Consular in question had been retrofitted during the Clone Wars, it had either a Class 1.5 or Class 2 hyperdrive. Consular cruisers had crews of 8 personnel, plus a retinue of astromech droids, as well as spacious interior quarters for guests or embarked troops. The Consular had powerful deflector shields, and armed ships of the class boasted 5 twin turbo laser batteries and a single dual medium laser cannon. Most Republic Consular class cruisers were scrapped during the Dark Times, but a few stuck around long enough to be picked up by the Rebel fleet, where they served as support ships. There weren't many Alliance Consulars, but the ones the Rebellion had were well liked by Rebel crews. On top of these better known models, there were also many classes of Corvette in the Rebel fleet that we have very little information about, as well as some that have yet to be identified. These included Alderaanian gunships, unnamed Blockade Runner classes, and a class of vessel only identified as a Rebel ship of the line, an 8-engined, well-shielded and lightly armed craft with a substantial cargo carrying capacity. But by far, the Alliance's most well-known and heavily used corvettes were the famed Corellian corvettes, manufactured by the Corellian Engineering Corporation, most famously including the CR-90 corvette, the class of Princess Leia's Tantive 4. Apart from the CR-90, the Alliance also used the older but very similar CR-70 corvette and the more militarized CR-92A Assassin-class corvette, which boasted heavier shields, armor, and weaponry. But the CR-90 was the Alliance's favorite corvette class by a long shot, used extensively in a variety of roles. CR-90 corvettes had been around since before the Clone Wars, and they saw service in the Republic Judicial Forces, the Republic Navy, and even in the Imperial Navy, but they were so commonly used by the Rebellion that the Imperial Navy started treating all CR-90s as potential blockade runners, to the annoyance of many private CR-90 owners. The CR-90 Corellian corvette was 150 meters long, and it featured a large aft section with 11 engines, a pair of cylindrical docking modules immediately forward, a blocky flared-out midsection, and a cylindrical hammer-headed forward module connected to the rest of the ship by a narrow neck. Many of the CR-90's vital systems were located in the aft engine block, most prominently the ship's main power plant, a Mason Branger 7085 ionization reactor and regulator, which was located at the center of the engine block's forward end. This reactor was ringed with pressurized fuel cells, and it fed large amounts of power into the Corvette's many engines. The CR-90 was also equipped with emergency power cells in case the reactor was taken offline, but these couldn't power all the ship's systems, so a reactor failure would cripple a CR-90 corvette. Most of the aft engine block was taken up by a set of 11 Gyrodyne TUR-58 ion turbine engines, which provided the CR-90 with primary propulsion. These were stacked in 3 layers, with layers of 4 on the top and bottom and a layer of 3 between them. The large number and high power of these engines gave the CR-90 a high thrust to mass ratio, allowing the Corvette to easily outrun most larger ships. With a top atmospheric speed of 950 km per hour and a maximum acceleration of 2,100 Gs in open space, the CR-90 was fast and it was highly maneuverable too, able to fly in circles around most Imperial ships. The CR-90's CEC subspace hyperdrive was only a Class 2, limiting its speed in hyperspace, but it was still fast enough to serve the Alliance on missions across the galaxy. For such a small ship, the CR-90 Corvette was quite durable with resilient ferromagnesium ceramic plating and a pair of powerful FOA Kingsmayer 484J4E screen control and shield projectors. The main shield projectors were located at the aft end of the ship, mounted to the front of the engine block, and they were quite powerful, augmenting the Corvette's tough armor. Many Alliance CR-90s were equipped with additional armor plating, especially to cover the stock Corvette's vulnerable stateroom windows. A pair of smaller secondary shield projectors were located at the front end of the ship to either side of the cockpit viewports to protect the cockpit module. Just forward of the CR-90's aft engine block was a set of cylindrical sensor towers, one dorsal and one ventral, which featured the main transceiver dishes of the Corvette's primary sensor arrays, a pair of Pax Hustano variable array sensor units. To either side of these towers were the Corvette's cylindrical standard design docking modules, which featured airlocks and docking rings compatible with most larger starships or space stations. Each of these airlocks lay at the end of a branch of the Corvette's main corridor, which merged into one large central corridor forward of the sensor array. The CR-90's life support units and a few storage areas were located in the docking modules as well, as were access corridors to the Corvette's engine room. The main corridor, meanwhile, led forward into the midsection where the bulk of the CR-90's cargo space and crew decks were located. The CR-90's interior was divided into at least 4 decks, which were connected by a pair of turbolifts, one in the forward module just aft of the cockpit and another near the back of the midsection. Within the midsection, the lowest deck was mostly given over to cargo storage and, on some Corvettes, a small, starfighter-sized docking bay. Depending on the configuration, a CR-90 could carry up to 3,000 tons of cargo, though most carried much less, as well as a year of consumables. The deck above contained an escape pod access corridor along either side of the midsection, as well as the main tech section and operations forum. The upper levels contained crew areas adjoining the main corridor. On the Tantive 4, the main corridor level contained diplomatic suites, including a formal dining room and a formal state conference chamber, as well as access to the high-capacity escape pods, while the level above, the highest deck of the ship, contained Princess Leia's personal stateroom and private suite. The CR-90 Corvette carried a total of 12 escape pods, 8 standard-size Faberstein Largo 37's emergency escape pods, and 4 larger Faberstein maximum capacity life ships. The standard escape pods were located along the underside of the midsection, with 4 on each side. Each of these pods was rated for up to 3 people. The 4 higher capacity larger pods, meanwhile, were located along the sides of the midsection's upper half, and they could each seat 12 personnel. These larger escape pods were each armed with a single Mount Tame and Buck H9 turbo laser, allowing the pods to double as small turrets when docked with the Corvette. These turbo lasers weren't the most powerful, but they were precise and quick moving, allowing the CR-90 to easily shoot down incoming starfighters. The rest of the CR-90's weapons, a pair of larger, more powerful Tame and Back H9 dual turbo laser turrets, were located at the front end of the midsection atop short towers, one dorsal and one ventral. These were the Corvette's main weapons, each manned by 2 gunners, and they were capable of both taking out starfighters and dealing damage to larger capital ships. While these weapon systems weren't the most impressive, designed primarily for defense against fighters and smaller capital ships, the CR-90's weapon mounts were also highly modular, allowing for a variety of configurations. Some were upgraded to carry 6 dual turbo lasers instead of 2 dual and 4 single, while the most heavily armed carried 8 turbo lasers, 6 laser cannons, and 4 ion cannons. At the very front end of the CR-90 Corvette was the cockpit module, which contained the main crew stations, quarters for the crew, officers, and captain, a pair of forward airlocks, the main computer room, the officers' briefing room, and, of course, the cockpit. The number of crew a CR-90 needed depended on configuration. It could be as low as 30 and as high as 165, with a minimum crew of 7. Standard CR-90s were manned by a crew of 46, consisting of 8 officers and 38 enlisted, while the Tantive 4 had a crew of 85, the standard 46 crew plus 39 diplomatic staff. The Corvette could also carry a variety of passengers, up to 600 with some configurations, as well as embarked troops. The CR-90 was designed as a multi-purpose craft, and before it became a staple of the Rebel fleet, it was most well known as the favorite of Corellian smugglers. The Alliance modified most of its CR-90s for combat, equipping them with extra armor and sometimes extra weapons, while others were converted into troop carriers or cargo haulers. Most of the Alliance's Corellian corvettes were used as light escorts, anti-fighter picket ships, and especially as blockade runners. Some operated independently, some operated as part of detached battle groups, and others operated as part of the combined Rebel fleet. When they saw action, it was usually as an anti-starfighter screening ship, as that was what the CR-90's weapons were best for. In this role, CR-90s fought many battles against Imperial forces, tearing up fighter squadrons in battles above Endor and many other worlds. But it was the Alliance's Blockade Runners that were the most well-known, especially Princess Leia's ship, the Tantive 4, which recovered the Death Star schematics during the Battle of Toprawa before being captured by the Empire over Tatooine. Moving on, it's time to talk about the Rebel fleet's frigates. Under the Anaxis War College system, any ship between 200 and 400 meters long was a frigate. And while these ships generally weren't much bigger than corvettes, they were typically less maneuverable but more heavily armed. Frigates usually supported larger warships as part of combined fleets, destroying starfighters and smaller capitals while providing fire support against enemy cruisers. Frigates were often deployed in smaller groups to defend larger vessels, supply convoys, or civilian vessels, and the Alliance sometimes used them as light privateer ships as well. Among the Rebel fleet's frigates were 2 old Corellian Engineering Corporation ships, the CC-7700 frigate and the CC-9600 frigate. The CC-7700 was the older of the two and was meant to serve as an interdictor ship, though it had turbo laser batteries as well, allowing it to serve as a proper frigate. The CC-7700 was basically just a platform for its gravity well projector, however, which could be used to rip ships out of hyperspace and prevent them from jumping again. The Alliance used them to interdict and ambush key Imperial targets. The CC-9600, while based on the CC-7700's design, was strictly a frigate armed with a mix of turbo lasers, ion cannons, and tractor beams. It was capable of atmospheric flight, and it could transport a full regiment of Rebel soldiers into battle. Also used by the Rebel fleet was the most ugly class of frigate ever designed, the Cuirassar Fire-class cruiser carrier. These crimes against design were the work of the Sorrow Sub Corporation, and though they were hideous, they proved quite effective, making them a staple of the Rebel fleet. Designed to act as bulk freighters, these vessels were frequently converted into pocket carriers by the Rebellion. These frigates were roughly 350 meters in length, and from above, they appeared triangular with a flat and largely featureless dorsal hull. On the underside, much of this triangular hull was flat and extremely thin, with a ventral fin protruding from the front and a large, blocky section at the aft end. The back of this aft section contained the Quasar-Fire's main power core and engine array, as well as its moderate quality Class 2 hyperdrive. The rest of the aft module was dominated by an enormous cargo bay, which was completely open to space at the front, albeit protected by a MagCon field and emergency tractor fields. This cargo bay was converted into a huge hangar bay on Rebel Quasar-Fires, with carrying capacity for 4 fighter squadrons, or 48 starfighters, usually a mix of X-Wings, A-Wings, and B-Wings, plus shuttles and landing craft. This landing capacity was greater than many much larger Rebel capital ships, making the Quasar-Fire one of the most valuable Rebel carriers. Typically, Quasar-Fire frigates were staffed by crews of 250, with a minimum crew of 100, and they had capacity for a full year's worth of consumables. Stock Quasar-Fires were unarmed and had fairly weak armor and shields, but Rebel ships were upgraded with weaponry. 2 tractor beam projectors were mounted to either side of the hangar bay, while a pair of heavy turbo lasers were mounted on the chin of the ship's forward fin, which contained the frigate's bridge. The Alliance used Quasar-Fire frigates extensively, having acquired several at auction and receiving 8 more from the Celestins when they sided with the Rebellion. Some Quasar-Fires served with the Rebel fleet and fought in the Battle of Endor, but most were detached from the fleet, serving as mobile bases for the Alliance Starfighter Corps. These detached frigates served as the cores of small fleet groups, accompanied by escorts due to the Quasar-Fire's fragility. One former Republic Navy ship that saw extensive service in the Rebel fleet was the Corellian Engineering Corporation DP-20 gunship, also known as the DP-20 frigate. While it was designed specifically for military use, the Corellian gunship, as it was often called, was easy to acquire on the open market, and it operated as a tougher version of the CR-90 Corvette. At 120 meters in length, the DP-20 was technically a Corvette by length classification, but its firepower and armor meant that it functioned as a frigate in practice. Nearly half of the DP-20 frigate's interior was given over to its powerful reactor, its Class 2 hyperdrive, and its main engines, which could propel the DP-20 at a maximum atmospheric speed of 1,000 kilometers per hour. The cramped forward portions of the DP-20 were largely taken up by powerful shield generators and plenty of weaponry, buried under layers of heavy armor plating. Its cramped interior had space for just 300 tons of cargo, 8 months of consumables, and no passengers. Typically, a crew of 101 personnel manned a DP-20 frigate, 45 crew and 46 gunners, although the ship could also operate on a minimum crew of just 10 people. The DP-20 frigate was armed with 8 dual turbo lasers, 6 quad laser cannons, and 4 concussion missile tubes. 2 of the dual turbo lasers were mounted on the front section and had forward-firing arcs, while the remaining turbo lasers and quad lasers were located along the sides of the craft with 3 turbo lasers and 3 quad lasers per side. Each concussion missile tube carried 30 heavy concussion missiles total. All told, the DP-20 was absurdly well armed for a ship of its size, earning its role as a frigate. The Alliance acquired its DP-20s for use as small, fast attack ships. During the Galactic Civil War, pirate gangs regularly used these ships for raids on Imperial shipping convoys, and the Rebellion used them for more or less the same purpose, as well as for the frigate's original purpose as an anti-starfighter picket. The Rebel fleet had a great many DP-20 frigates, and they were among the fleet's most commonly deployed ships, seeing action in the Alliance's attack on Camino, the Battle of the Corridor during the Siege of Yavin, and the invasion of Bakura, among other engagements. One of the more well-known Rebel frigate classes was the smallest of the Alliance's Mon Calamari warships, the MC-30C frigate. Manufactured by the Mon Calamari shipyards, The MC-30C was a powerful mid-level frigate designed to engage enemy capital ships or provide fire support for larger cruisers. Unlike most of the Alliance's smaller capital ships, the MC-30C was top of the line, and it was one of the Rebel fleet's most dependable frigate models. Like most Mon Calamari ships, the MC-30C had an elongated, bulbous, organic-looking hull design with an aft section that tapered into a narrow tail, which was tipped with a broad aft fin. The exact size of this ship is unknown, but as a mid-level frigate, it was probably somewhere around 300 meters long. The MC-30C's 5 sublight engines were quite powerful, making this frigate one of the fastest and most maneuverable ships of its type. Its hyperdrive was a state-of-the-art Class 1, and it boasted a powerful shield generator buried deep within the hull, making it hard to destroy. The MC-30C's shields continually regenerated during battle, allowing these frigates to shrug off substantial punishment, but if the shields collapsed, the MC-30C would be vulnerable. Its hull was only lightly armored and easily breached by sustained fire. If enemy vessels concentrated fire on the MC-30C in battle, it would likely be destroyed. The MC-30C lacked starfighter hangars, although it did have a carrying capacity for 95 passengers and 2 years of consumables, alongside its crew of 850 personnel. It made up for this lack of fighters with sheer firepower, however. For a frigate, the MC-30C was heavily armed, boasting 16 medium turbo laser turrets, 16 twin laser cannons, 2 heavy proton torpedo launchers, and 6 cluster bomb launchers with 6 cluster bombs each. Most of these weapons were designed for use against enemy capital ships, allowing the MC-30C to function as a capital ship killer, taking out other frigates and larger cruisers. Its cluster bombs, meanwhile, were used to defend the MC-30C against incoming Imperial fighters. These bombs would be fired off at close range and detonated in the midst of fighter squadrons, often taking Imperial pilots by surprise. Once the frigate ran out of cluster bombs, it would be forced to rely on its laser cannons for point defense. The MC-30C was a staple of the Rebel fleet, one of its most reliable frigate classes. Most of the Alliance's Mon Calamari frigates stuck with the fleet most of the time, but they could also be detached as part of strike missions, serving well in combat against larger Imperial vessels. Lastly, we have 2 classes of former Imperial frigates that were best known for their use by the Rebellion: the EF-76 Nebulon-B escort frigate and the Nebulon-B2 frigate. Both of these vessels were designed and built by Kuat drive yards for the Imperial Navy, which used them as escorts specializing in fending off Rebel starfighter assaults. The Nebulon-B was designed near the end of the Clone Wars and premiered shortly after the war's end, replacing the older Class C frigate, and it served the Imperial Navy for decades, proving highly effective against fighters and bombers, and useful for providing fire support for larger capital ships. However, many ships of the class were captured by the Rebel Alliance through a mix of defections and theft, and the Nebulon-B became a staple of the Rebel fleet, known more as a Rebel ship than an Imperial one. Most Rebel Nebulon-Bs continued to serve in their original role as escort frigates, while others were converted for other duties. The EF-76 Nebulon-B escort frigate was 300 meters long, 76 meters wide, and 166 meters tall, and its design was unusual, to say the least. Most of the ship's mass was concentrated at the forward end, which featured a bulbous, elongated main section and a tall fin structure below it. The fin consisted of a ramshackle-looking group of different modules, which ranged from bullet-shaped to long and blocky, held in place by a jagged layer of external plating. A thin spar connected the upper part of this main section to the aft section, which was blocky and vaguely triangular, with a pair of fins stabbing down from the bottom and an array of engines at the back. That aft section contained, among other systems, the Nebulon-B's main reactor complex and backup power cells, which were supplemented by auxiliary power generators nestled deep within the upper forward section. Most of the remainder of the aft module was dominated by the frigate's 7 Kuat Galaxy 15 ion engines, which were arranged in a vaguely triangular pattern, with 1 on the bottom of the module, 2 above it, and the remaining 4 along the top, clustered in 2 pairs. These engines were decently powerful, but the Nebulon-B was still fairly sluggish for its size, with a maximum atmospheric speed of 800 km per hour and a maximum acceleration of 1,200 Gs in open space. It wasn't much faster in hyperspace either. The frigate's triple tame hyperdrive, which was housed in the engine block between the 2 pairs of upper engines, was only rated as a Class 2. To prevent any of these high power systems from overloading, the aft engine block featured a pair of large fin-like static discharge vanes, which hung down from the underside of the fuselage, radiating excess energy into space. The main reactor, power cells, hyperdrive, and engines took up most of the aft engine block, but this section contained a few other features of note as well. A handful of crewed decks ran through the aft section, which included the ship's engineering sections, the main engineering operations center, and quarters for the engineering team and the chief engineer. A tower on the dorsal starboard side of the engine block housed the frigate's enhanced Delphus JC671 deflector shield generator, which was one of the Nebulon-B's 2 shield systems, with the other being an emergency serrage seal shielding system. The Nebulon-B had exceptionally strong shields for a frigate, nearly twice as strong as other Imperial frigates, and its hull was pretty tough as well, armoured with a titanium reinforced alloy. The frigate's engineering sections continued through the Nebulon-B's midsection spar, also known as the engineering boom. This section also featured a variety of docking tubes, which allowed freighters, fighters, and shuttles to dock on the frigate and allowed the frigate to dock with larger starships or space stations. The engineering boom linked the engine block to the Nebulon-B's main module, the upper part of the forward section. On stock Nebulon-B frigates, the aft end of this section was taken up by the frigate's hangars, which were designed to carry 2 squadrons of TIE fighters or 24 starfighters total, plus an assortment of shuttles. Rebel frigates that kept these hangars generally stocked them with X-Wings and other Alliance starfighters. Apart from the hangars, the aft end of the Nebulon-B's main section featured the frigate's communications antennae. The primary communications array lay along the port side of the frigate, while the short-range communications array was housed in a small tower atop the aft end of the section. The main antennae were long-range and multi-frequency, and they allowed Nebulon-B frigates to serve effectively as deep space command ships. The forward decks of the main section were mostly given over to various weapon systems, the freshwater tanks, and several crewed decks. The various modules within the Nebulon-B's lower fin all had different purposes. The uppermost module contained the ship's officers' quarters, while the one below contained passenger quarters, which had bunks for 75 embarked troops. The one below that contained the command decks, including the main bridge, which was located at the front of the module. Further below was a large cargo bay module, which could store up to 6,000 tons of cargo, and, together with the water and fuel tanks, 2 years worth of consumables, while the module below that housed the ship's recycling systems. A large blocky structure below that housed the frigate's sophisticated Fabritech ANS 9.5W wide-range sensor systems, with the forward sensor array at the front of the module and the aft sensor array at the back, while the remaining modules below that were primarily dedicated to weapons. Standard model Nebulon-B frigates were manned by crews of 920, 854 crew and 66 gunners, though they could operate on a minimum crew of 307. Standard Nebulon-Bs were well armed for frigates. Their main weapons were an array of 12 tame and back XI-7 medium turbo lasers, some turreted and others fixed. 3 of these were located along either side, while 6 were located along the front of the vessel, with 1 turret mounted atop the upper forward section and the main turbo laser nestled beneath the forward sensor array. These turbo lasers were supplemented with 12 Borstel RH-8 light laser cannons, which could be used for point defense against starfighters. 2 of these were mounted to either side, 2 more were mounted aft, and the remaining 6 were mounted fore, including 1 large laser cannon mounted on the bottom of the forward fin. The bow of the Nebulon-B featured a pair of Pylon Q2 heavy tractor beam projectors, and some Nebulon-Bs also sported a concussion missile launcher. Most of the Nebulon-Bs in the Rebel fleet remained in the default configuration, but a few, most notably including the Redemption, were converted into medical frigates. These hospital ship variant Nebulon-Bs had some of their weaponry removed and replaced with backup power plants and shield generators, leaving them with just 6 turbo lasers and 8 laser cannons, while their hangar bays and other parts of the main section were converted into hospital facilities. On the Redemption, this complex contained a surgery suite staffed with medical droids, 16 Bacta tanks, intensive care units, a recovery ward, a laboratory with quarantine facilities and pathogen analysis equipment, and rooms for 745 patients. The Redemption also had part of its cargo bay converted into a morgue. These facilities were comprehensive and extremely effective, with a 98% patient survival rate, and they were very valuable to the Rebellion, which desperately needed every soldier it had. Hospital ship variant Nebulon-Bs had crews of 850 personnel, 773 enlisted and 77 officers, while their hospitals were staffed by 80 medical personnel plus droids. Combat model Nebulon-Bs were among the best frigates of their time. They were durable, packed with plenty of firepower, and carried a respectable number of starfighters, and while they weren't very fast or maneuverable, they could still keep pace with many smaller vessels. The Empire deployed its Nebulon-Bs as a counter to Rebel starfighter raids against Imperial supply convoys, and the frigates proved so effective at anti-starfighter duties that it caused the Alliance to stop some of these raids altogether. The frigates also had the firepower to engage capital ships, however, allowing them to effectively defend convoys against pirate fleets and rebel battle groups as well. The Nebulon-B wasn't without its weaknesses, as sustained fire to the ship's central spar would split the frigate in 2 and vent its atmosphere into space, but it was still quite formidable. The Rebellion found the combat Nebulon-Bs useful in the same ways, using them as anti-fighter pickets or fire support for larger cruisers. Within the Rebel fleet, the Alliance's Nebulon-Bs played a key role supporting and defending the Mon Calamari cruisers that made up the fleet's core. They sometimes did the same as part of smaller battle groups, but they also often served as the flagships of these attack forces or as long-range scouts and search and rescue vessels. The Rebellion also made use of the Nebulon-B's sister ship, the Nebulon-B2 frigate. This ship was based on the original Nebulon-B and served a similar role, but it had several key differences in design and performance. Its engine block was configured differently and inverted, the central spar was thicker and less vulnerable to concentrated fire, and the forward section featured 2 ventral fins in a V pattern rather than just one. The B2 was only 253.2 meters long, and it was slightly faster, and though its shields and hull armor were weaker than the stock Nebulon-B, it boasted additional weaponry. 8 turbo laser batteries, 8 dual heavy turbo laser turrets, and a concussion missile launcher. The B2 was manned by a crew of 1,120, and it could carry 150 troops as passengers. Like the original Nebulon-B, it was designed to serve as an escort frigate or a command ship in smaller fleets. Both the Alliance's combat Nebulon-Bs and Nebulon-B2s served it well as frigates, but the Rebel fleet's most valuable ships of the class were the hospital ships. These vessels often accompanied fleet groups to battle zones, as the Alliance heavily prioritized recovery and care for wounded personnel due to perpetual manpower shortages. These hospital ships could expect no quarter from the Imperial Navy, which had no qualms with destroying medical ships if there were rebels on board. Other hospital ships, including the Redemption, stayed with the Rebel fleet most of the time, acting as the Alliance's main medical bases. Rebel Nebulon frigates of all variants fought in many battles over the course of the Galactic Civil War. Every Nebulon-B the Alliance had left was deployed with the Rebel fleet in the Battle of Endor, in which the combat frigates helped Mon Calamari cruisers and fighter wings destroy several Imperial Star Destroyers. Several of the frigates were destroyed in the battle, including the Redemption, which was destroyed by the Death Star, but they nonetheless played a vital role in winning the Rebellion's biggest victory. So that's our look at the smaller vessels of the Rebel fleet. But what do you think? Which of these ships is your favorite and why? Let us know in the comment section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.